The Pittsburgh Pirates were well represented in MLB Pipeline's top 100 on Friday, and we're going to talk about all of those players, their expectations, their ceilings, and what they could offer the Pirates down the line on today's episode of Locked On Pirates.
You are Locked On Pirates, your daily Pittsburgh Pirates podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome back, everybody, to the Locked On Pirates podcast here on the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team, your Pittsburgh Pirates every day. My name is Ethan Smith, your host of this wonderful show, joined by Gary Morgan on this fabulous Monday. Gary will probably be reverting back to his usual Monday slot that he has every week because, folks, we are back to in-season mode as of this week, which means that you will be getting a show every Monday through Friday. The goal is to have them come out in the morning. Things change. If it happens, you're still getting a show every day. It's going to be fun. We're going to have a great time here in this February pitchers and catchers report in a few weeks on Valentine's Day. Hopefully they love each other while they're there. And yeah, we get spring training games in about 3 weeks. I already have, folks, I'm going to let you know right now, unless something unforeseen happens, I already have the next 20 episodes written out for this show as we start the player review series. So that's going to be very fun as well. And on today's show, we're doing it again, where I wrote a wonderful piece over at Steel City Pirates over the weekend on the Pirates being represented very well in MLB's Pipeline's top 100 prospect list. And it was lengthy. I will say I definitely went to the word count, and it was almost 2,700 words of a lot of information that a lot of you guys seem to really enjoy. So I figured, why not make a show out of it too? And if you haven't already known, since Friday, the Pirates had 5 players represented in the top 100 prospect list on MLB Pipeline, starting with Paul Skenes, obviously, who is number 3, Termarr Johnson, who slotted in the top 50 at 54, and then, of course, Jared Jones, Anthony Solometo, and Bubba Chandler rounding it out in the top 100. Found it very interesting that the NL Central had 3 teams with 5 or more prospects in the top 100, which I think is very, very fun for things to start. But before we even get into Paul Skenes, who's we're going to start with here, Gary, I do think that this is like really impressive for this team, and I said it in my piece yesterday, mainly because they did have 3 guys that were notable players graduate from prospect status last year, and Endy Rodriguez, Henry Davis, and Quinn Priester, who were all, I believe, in the top 5 of their prospect list in 2022. So, yeah, folks, this is impressive, and I know it's something that we kind of probably get tired of talking about at this stage, considering we've been talking about it for the last half decade, but it's notable and it's noteworthy. And when you start with Paul Skenes, Gary, I'll let you kind of chime in on this. When you have the number 1 ranked pitcher in all of baseball, and he's ranked alongside Jackson Holliday and Jackson Chourio, who are 2 guys that are going to be good baseball players, I think that's cause for celebration if you're a Pirates fan.
Sure it is, man. I think first thing to know is there's a different list for pretty much whatever your flavor is. And MLB Pipeline happens to be one that focuses a lot more on the ceiling of a player. And what I mean by that is best case scenario. So they look at everybody and they think, okay, if this, and they add all that up, and you can turn some guys into God pretty quick that way. Mm-hmm. So I think that's number 1 to recognize. It's about ceiling with MLB Pipeline. It has nothing to do with how quickly they expect them to get to the league. It's about how good they think they can be overall. But it's impressive, and it's good that Paul Skenes is up there. You want me to talk specifically about Paul Skenes? I think if you miss on a 1-1 starting pitcher, you've done something horrible.
Yeah.
So if he wasn't in the top 5, I think there'd be a lot of questions about why that selection was made and how badly they screwed up, right? So good to see him there. If nothing else, it's comforting that the talent matches the draft position.
Yeah, and you look at this guy, and obviously everybody kind of knew. Like, he was going to be either pick one or pick two, depending on what the Pirates did last year. And there was like a week and a half span for me where I was really torn on this. I didn't know if I wanted Skenes. I didn't know if I wanted Dylan Cruz. That was the two guys. And then some people would throw in Wyatt Langford's name. And thankfully, that's all done because that whole process was just stressful. But you look at Skenes, and I mean, it's one of those things with a player like that where I think, right, we're on the show right after he was drafted, I believe, on a Monday. And you said to me, because it was something kind of new to me, that scouts are not just going to throw the name Steven Strasburg around when they are evaluating a prospect, especially a pitcher. And to see, not only see Steven Strasburg's name thrown around, even minimally, it was thrown around everywhere by a plethora of prospect scouts. And Skenes, I mean, again, last year, you can go back and look at some of what he did last year, and you can evaluate it if you want to. It was 5 games that he pitched that really didn't teach us much of anything except the fact that he's going to blow that fastball by everybody in the minor leagues. I think that's really all it's going to be.
I think we couldn't have learned much from what he did after being drafted. They're just
No.
I mean, the minor league competition he faced, like in Greensboro and Bradenton in particular, that doesn't even rise to the level of where he was on the collegiate field.
No.
So you're probably looking at the curve being his first real test, and he didn't do so well there. And the things that I think that we were a little concerned about, like the shape on his fastball, movement on his fastball, I think that sort of thing, he'll work on it. I'm sure he'll develop it. He's certainly got the leverage and the frame to make that movement happen. He just hasn't ever needed it.
No.
I think that's something that happens to a lot of these kids that we kind of forget about. Like, they're not as evolved as a major league pitcher because they haven't needed to be. There's nobody going to touch that fastball like in college for the most part, except for maybe his teammate last year. And
yeah,
let's just say that didn't come up very much, right? So, I mean, he wasn't going to make a mistake with that fastball, and adding some shape to it shouldn't be the end of the world. I think he probably needs to develop some kind of off speed, a little bit more to give him something to just take people's eye off it a little bit. He's got a little bit of development to do. All these kids do. I mean, even Jackson Holliday's got a little work to do.
Well, and I think it's important to remember that with a guy like Skenes too, is you have a lot of people saying, just put Paul Skenes in the starting rotation right away. And let's just get the formalities out of the way. Folks, I would also urge you to, and this is something that I actually told my mom about because she asked me, she's like, is he a guy that can come up this year? And I said, well, I'm talking about it on the show tomorrow, so listen to the show. Sure, Paul Skenes can come up this year if he acclimates himself well to an MLB schedule, and if he just dominates down there, yeah, sure, he can come up this year. I wouldn't be surprised if he does. I wouldn't be surprised if he doesn't. And a lot of people would probably be very upset if he doesn't. But as you just mentioned, all of these kids, when they come out of the draft, have to learn how to be professionals after this. This is something that Paul Skenes has never done over the course of a full season on this schedule. You can go back and look at LSU and say, yeah, well, he pitched this many innings and stuff like that. But that wasn't every 5 days. That was not on an MLB professional level schedule where he's expected to pitch 90 to 100 pitches every single start. And that's something he's going to have to learn how to do. You mentioned the movement on his fastball is something he's going to have to figure out. Can that changeup end up being a plus pitch for him? How far does that slider really take him as a strikeout pitch? These are all questions that you can ask about him. Now, I will say, obviously, yeah, he can come up, but circumstances could also play into that too with where the Pirates are. If they're in a contending window and he looks like he's ready, sure, why not? If they're in a spot where they think they can go on a run. If they're not, then why bring him up anyway? That's what I would say.
I honestly think that there's one factor that most of us aren't really thinking about, and it's that I think the Pirates will be very careful with his inning count this year.
So do I.
So my point for saying that is I don't see him throwing, 75 innings in the minors and then coming up and throwing another 75, 80 to 100 in the majors. So, I mean, if you think he really has a shot this year, you're probably looking at more towards the second half. And more than just the player or even just who's on the team or whatever, you've got other guys that you have to work through. Like Quinn Priester's going to have to probably get another shot. Jared Jones is up there in line. Mike Burrows is going to come back. Brubaker's going to come back. You've got Kyle Nicholas sitting there. There's a ton of guys that have to get a shot. Braxton Ashcraft. I mean, it's time to crap or get off the pot with him. He was the Pirates' number 10 prospect 3 years ago. He's the Pirates' number 10 prospect this year.
Yeah.
I mean, like, yeah, he's had injuries and everything, but hey, come on, let's go. You know,
yeah.
like,
At some point, we got to see. You can't just sit like this. You got to go like this. At some point, you got to go up.
But when you say things like that, people get the impression that you're saying, "Oh, well, Burrows is going to block, or Burrows is going to block Paul Skenes." That's crap. And I'm not saying that. I'm just saying he's first in line, and he's already on the 40-man. And when you put a guy on a 40-man, you're upping their timeline. You have decided that it's time to get ready to start that clock.
Mm-hmm.
Paul Skenes isn't going to push that unless he does crazy things, which he has inside of him.
Yes, he does. And I would argue, too, to kind of end the topic on Paul Skenes before we move to Johnson and everybody else. Folks, also, Gary brought up something that I think is fascinating. If you're worried about Mike Burrows or Kyle Nicholas or Braxton Ashcraft or whoever blocking Paul Skenes, if they're blocking Paul Skenes, folks, that means that they're probably performing well enough to say that Paul Skenes isn't in the rotation. And that is a good thing. If you have a rotation that can't fit Paul frickin' Skenes into it when he's ready, folks, that's a good problem. That is a phenomenal problem if that's what it comes to. But we'll end the Paul Skenes stuff there. And we're going to move into Termarr Johnson, who, wow, I'm very ready for the Termarr Johnson experience when that is almost here. But before we do that, we're going to talk about Factor Meals. We have a new sponsor on the show because you can get started on your resolutions with Factor so you're ready for the new year. The month of January is almost done, but maybe you're still working on that New Year's resolution. But Factor's ready-to-eat meal delivery takes the stress out of meal planning and sets you up for success in the new year. Skip the grocery stores, prep work, and cooking fatigue. Instead, get chef-crafted, dietitian-approved meals delivered right to your door with over 35 meals to choose from per week, including options like keto, calorie smart, vegan, and veggie, and more. Plus, over 55 weekly add-ons, you'll have a ton of nutritious and flavorful options to kickstart your resolutions, because stress less over meal times in the new year. Factor's no prep, no mess meals, free up time otherwise spent shopping, cooking, and cleanup. No more wasting time in the kitchen because, let the Pirates cook. You don't need to. Head to factormeals.com/LockedOnMLB50 and use code LockedOnMLB50 to get 50% off. That's a lot of 50s. That's code LockedOnMLB50 at factormeals.com/LockedOnMLB50 to get 50% off of your meals at factormeals.com. And as I say every show as well, make sure you go check out Locked On Sports Today because it's here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. So go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. Before we get into Johnson, Ethan re-downloaded Reddit yesterday and just searched the Locked On Pirates. I understand. I understand some of the comments. And some people are like, I hope he's not reading this. It's like, well, even if I did, which I did, that's fine. Why do you think I'm drinking coffee on the show now? Because they said that my voice isn't energetic enough. I'm like, okay, great. We're just going to drink coffee on the show now. It's okay, though. That means you still tuned into the show. Still love it. We're having fun over here. But I did get a lot of recommendations a year ago from somebody asking about a podcast. And they said, well, Ethan over at Locked On Pirates is daily. So there's your fix. Anyways, we're talking the top 100 prospects, Gary. And the Pirates, again, 5 players in that ranking. Only one position player, which, can be perceived how it wants to be. But also you have to remember that a lot of the position players that were top prospects on this team are now in Pittsburgh. You look at Rodriguez, you look at Davis, Peguero, Gonzalez, etc. All have made their debuts and graduated. Termarr Johnson, folks. I will just read directly from my piece yesterday. Johnson was also ranked the highest second baseman in the prospect pool this year, indicating he'd have a spot in the top 50 as one of the best pure hitters in all of the minor leagues. I am not a prospect guru by any means. Do not get me wrong on that at all. But when MLB Pipeline says, as the 2022 draft approached, Johnson emerged as not only one of the best pure hitters in the class, but was perceived to be one of the best high school hitters in recent memory. Folks, this kid can hit and hit a lot. And you might be thinking when you look him up, it's like, wait, he's 5'8" and he has plus power? Yeah, he's hit 19 home runs already in his minor league career. This kid has some power, folks. And if you go watch his swing, it's smooth as butter. I mean, you don't even have to know anything about a batting stance or anything of the sort to know that Termarr Johnson can hit the baseball. And you can see it on the right side of the screen. How good can this kid be? Well, for starters, Gary, he's not going to play shortstop. I don't care what he did in high school. He's not going to play shortstop. It's not really his fault that he doesn't have range because he's only 5'8". He can grow, but it's just a thing that he does not have for me to play the position. He's going to play second base. That's what he's going to do. Johnson, again, Gary, what are your thoughts on this kid? Because, I mean, I'm just going to be a fanboy the whole time if I sit here and talk for the next 5 minutes.
He's going to be second base or he's going to be DH. I mean, those are pretty much his two spots that I think he can occupy. We said what we said with Skenes, where we talked about, like, scouts don't bring up the name of Strasburg, often when they're talking about comps. Well, here's a guy that was getting comped to Tony Gwynn. Like, you don't hear that ever.
No.
So, like, that doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean he's going to be Tony Gwynn. I certainly think that's unfair. But I certainly think this kid has some really natural hit tools that kind of make him hard to miss, if you will. Like, I think he'll make it whether the power translates to the bigs or not.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what's interesting about Termarr Johnson. I think he can field second base. I do realize the Pirates have a ton of options at second base, but it's amazing how quickly you don't have those options when a phenom comes along and kicks them out of the way. You won't care. And, just like San Diego extended Cronenworth for second base, and then all of a sudden Ha-Sung Kim comes along, and I guess we'll find another place for Cronenworth to play, right?
Yeah.
Well, you need good players, man. And when a phenom comes along, that spot will be his. He'll take it if he's good enough. And I think he can be every bit an all-star. And I think I'll leave it right there. And we'll see how it progresses. Hot take, though. I think he's got a better shot to make it this year than Skenes.
And I think that's perfectly reasonable and possible, because I thought about it too. When we say make it, that doesn't necessarily mean we're saying full time. Like, we're not saying he's going to come up here in July or August. Gary, I don't know if you're saying that, but I
just mean make the league. I'm not putting the time on it. I think he'll make the league in 24.
But you're looking at a kid last year that hit 18 home runs, walked over 100 times with a 422 on base percentage and an 860 OPS. Those are not, I don't care if it's the lower minors or not. Those are numbers that are going to garner attention. And of course, he has 412 at bats so far in his career. Yeah.
And he would tell you that he struck out more than he'd like to.
And he did, especially in the beginning of the year. He was definitely.
It is a problem that the Pirates have developed throughout their system. A lot of guys that develop any kind of power tend to develop a really nasty strikeout habit too.
Yeah.
So it's not something that you want to see from a guy that's got an 80 grade hit total.
Yeah. And also with him, as far as a call up is concerned and how good he can be, I think that you're going to see him there's a possibility he plays at all three levels this year, I think. You're probably going to see him in Greensboro, definitely going to see him in Altoona. I think that's almost a given. You'll probably see him in Indianapolis later on in the year, and I wrote about it in my piece yesterday, and I think it's noteworthy to say. Remember 2021, folks, when O'Neal Cruz, everybody was raving that he made his debut in 2022, but everybody forgot that O'Neal Cruz played like the final 5 or 6 games for the Pirates in 2021. That's something that I think we could see from Termarr Johnson, especially, is like late August, early September kind of call up if he's playing to the degree that I expect him to. And a lot of it also hinges, and you brought up circumstance again. How is Leo Piguero playing at second? How is Jared Triolo playing at second, or whoever they decide to put over there? Is Nick Gonzalez just not figuring it out? If they have a hole at second base due to all these options, because they have the options. I mean, the options are there. But let's say they're not playing well in August or September, and Termarr Johnson's hitting 300 in Indianapolis. Why not? I mean,
Yeah. Especially, I think he's going to start in Altoona too. So I don't think he's going to even have to deal with Greensboro again. To be honest, I think they've seen enough of the faux power that comes from Greensboro.
Mm-hmm.
It's time to see what he does on a big boy course.
Yeah.
And to be honest, I think that roller coaster out in right field is in trouble again in Altoona. I think he's going to pound it. I really do.
Does that mean I'm going to have a roller coaster hit count on my show now every time Termarr Johnson hits the thing?
I don't know, man. Is it bad luck at this point after Mason Martin? I'm just asking.
Yeah, I know. God, dude. I remember when I started this show and Mason Martin, I was like, yeah, there's our first baseman of the future. And now look where we're at here with this one. But yeah, the first two, it's Skenes and Johnson, I think. I don't want to coin this and just say, yeah, they're going to be great players. But let's just say it would be pretty hard for neither of them to really work out at the major league level, I think. And if they don't, that's more, I think, on the team than it is on them, depending on what things happen. But the final three to round out the top 100 for the Pirates are three pitchers that I've named on this show quite a bit this offseason. Two of them, which I believe could come up before Paul Skenes, and one that being surrounded by Paul Skenes might actually help his growth moving forward. But before we talk about those three guys, we're going to talk about FanDuel. Well, the underdog story of the Lions lasted for about an hour and a half yesterday, and then it just immediately just went to crap. And happy Super Bowl to all who celebrate from FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. And if you're like me, Super Bowl Sunday is all about scoring the best seat on the couch, grabbing your favorite football snacks, and placing some super bets. Obviously, the Super Bowl is always great. I mean, there's people that don't even watch football that watch the Super Bowl. And sure, that'll happen this year with the Taylor Swift fans over there in Kansas City land. And FanDuel has so many ways for you to end the season with a W or 2 or even 3. Because not only can you bet on who will win the Super Bowl, but FanDuel also has bets for which players will score a touchdown, how many points will be scored, and so much more. New customers can join today and get $200 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. So just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to sign up. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL and an official sponsor of the Locked On Podcast Network. Alrighty, folks, and we are at the third and final segment of today's episode of Locked On Pirates, kicking off what will likely be, I can't count all the months in my head, but likely 9 months straight of 5 episodes every single day. So I am very excited. I think this is going to be a big year for the Pittsburgh Pirates. Obviously, over the weekend, if you saw my news, I will be in Pittsburgh for opening day this season. I will actually have a piece on Steel City Pirates about what that means to me. I actually cried 4 times writing that piece, shockingly. Very fun, though. Obviously, details will come out a little bit later, whatever it gets closer to that moment of when that game will be. More than likely, your favorite host will be at that new bar in center field and just take a picture and be like, come see me if you want, because that's probably what's going to happen, because I think a lot of booze will be bought during those 3 days, because I will likely be going to 3 games. As far as the prospects are concerned that we're about to talk about, Jared Jones, Anthony Solometo, and Bubba Chandler. I'm going to get one thing out of the way before we talk about all three of them. Bubba Chandler will not be coming up this year. I see no world where he's ready to come up this year. I just don't think so. He just moved to full-time pitching last year. I think the Pirates still want to see more. He did good last year, don't get me wrong. Had a great debut in Altoona. But I think he still has quite a bit of time before he's like officially ready. Now for Jones and Solometo, especially Jared Jones, Gary, if I remember correctly, when we talked about the spring training battles, you said that Jared Jones has the potential to be the best performer in spring and still not be in the rotation to begin the year. And
I actually think that's how it will play out. I think Jared Jones, I think he's probably got the most evolved stuff outside of Mitch Keller right now in the entire system. And I think Bubba Chandler probably has arguably the highest ceiling. I mean, It's really, really close with Paul Skenes, I think, as far as like which one of them could top out at the top. But Bubba's got some work to do. I think everybody knows that. He just did that last year. There's more stretching out to do. Mm-hmm. You got to see how he does against the next level of competition. He's got some time. Solometo's got some time. He looked really good last year. Doing it twice in a row, not everybody does that. Let's see how he does. You know, he made a lot of changes last year, and really improved in a lot of areas that I think a lot of people thought was going to take a lot longer for him.
Yeah.
So I think we're a little shocked he kind of got where he did last year. So I don't know if I want to put any kind of pin on him yet. Jared Jones, I think he probably could have been a major league pitcher last year. They chose instead to be careful with them, make sure they got the changeup where they wanted it to be, make sure they got the two-seamer working the way they wanted it. I'm not 100% sure it ever all came together for him last year. I do think that this offseason, though, he's used it wisely. And I think I do think in spring he's going to impress some people. I think there'll be more buzz about him being cut than Paul Skenes, who will get cut almost immediately just to avoid that whole injury bugaboo with major leagues in the spring.
Yeah, I think you maybe get one, maximum two starts from Skenes in spring. And by starts, I mean he'll probably pitch the first 2 innings of both games, and then that'll be it.
I think he'll get one, and then he'll get a thank you towards the end of spring after the major league players are being rested.
Yeah. And Anthony Solometo, I think, this is very interesting to talk about already with this. If he does, I'm not going to say if he does pan out, because I don't think that's fair. But the gravity of if Anthony Solometo does indeed end up being a good MLB pitcher for this team in particular, I think is understated by a lot of people. Folks, look at the last 3 off seasons that the Pirates have had. Actually, the last 4. If you really like, including this one. What has been a common theme over the last 4 off seasons for the Pittsburgh Pirates? They have had no left-handed pitching, and they've had to go out and sign Tyler Anderson, Jose Quintana, Rich Hill, and now Martin Perez. If Anthony Solometo, who really kind of fits the profile of a lot of those guys, his fastball sits around 91, 92, tops out at 95. He has that really fun delivery that can be very deceptive. He loves to use all of his secondary pitches very well. He works out. There's your left-handed option. Now, I'm not saying if he does work out that they can't go get another one if they decide to do so, but having a strong left-handed pitching prospect in your system is very important, I think. And that's something for Solometo that, yeah, he's got time. He's going, and like you said, it's very hard to have the same production he had last year 2 years in a row, especially because I expect him to be in Altoona a lot more this year than the lower levels.
Well, I expect them also to force him to struggle. And what I mean by that is same thing they did with Jones last year. You start putting them in uncomfortable situations. They went through a stretch of about 3 or 4 games where they wouldn't let Jared Jones throw anything but his changeup and his fastball. That's it. Because he was getting everybody out with a slider, and it was, wasn't learning anything.
Yeah, it's like, what more do we need to see?
Yeah. So you got to start forcing them to do some things that, you're probably going to get lit up. but we don't care about your stats. We care about what you're doing, and
Yeah.
and I think you'll see the same thing with Solometo. Like, they're going to start forcing him to use his fastball a lot more, and maybe uptick the velocity a little bit. I think they'd like to see him sitting around 93, 94 pretty consistently. If they can get him to start getting, that fastball where he wants, and he'll progress. I mean, it's really about that sort of thing. When you look at these stats from these kids, a lot of people will just go, oh, look, he took a step back. Maybe like talk to some people first before you say that, because sometimes the system, they'll admit that.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of the time, I think what you'll find is they're not really looking for stats. They're looking for progress in areas of concern.
I mean, if you wanted to look at stats last year, Paul Skenes had a 5.4 ERA in 5 starts.
Right.
Like, if that's what you really want to look at. And I mean, Termarr Johnson, if you, like most people, would just look at his average and say, oh, yep, he's garbage, because he only hit like 250 something last year. I can't remember right off the top of my head. But with this kind of stuff too, I think it's very important, and I'll end the show kind of on this. Do your own analysis and research of this stuff. Because, yeah, you could go read any number of stuff on a prospect, or you could go listen to this show or listen to anybody talk about it. But at the end of the day, when you physically put your eyes on these 5 players, which you can do with MILB.TV this year, it's not that expensive. I urge you to do it, especially on off days when the Pirates aren't playing, because that's what I'll be doing this year. Put your eyes on them and not necessarily make your own opinion on them, but just actually watch them play, I think, is the biggest thing. Because then when you actually watch them play and perform, yeah, you might see Paul Skenes and watch him pitch 6 innings and give up 3 runs, but you watched him do it, and you could say, yeah, that was a pretty good start where he wasn't giving up a lot of hard contact and just got unlucky. Or Termarr Johnson has a day where he's 1 for 5, but he hit a 3-run home run. You don't want to just look at box scores when it comes to these kids. Actually physically put your eyes on them. Go up to Altoona and go watch these guys play if you guys want. That's what I just urge everybody to do, I think, because I think it's just good practice to see these kids play, get to know them. That way, when they come up to the major leagues, you can say, yep, I was watching him every single day when I could at Altoona or in Greensboro or wherever they're at. And I think that's just good practice as well.
Yep.
I really do. And to end today's show, as always, my name is Ethan Smith. That's Gary Morgan, both, of course, over at Steel City Pirates. You can find the story that I wrote that was pretty much this whole episode already. Came out yesterday. You guys seem to love it. I'll have another kind of opinion story up on why returning to PNC Park is so important to me. I believe that comes out today. Gary, you obviously have 5 thoughts at 5. Coming out at 5 today. Always a great piece. Who do you have on the Pirates fan forum this week after you had Travis Snyder on last week?
We're going to have our buddy Taylor from Shop Yins on. He's our new sponsor over at the show, and going to have some merch for everybody to purchase if they wish.
Nice. Yep. And I probably do need to go get a t-shirt because they are actually really cool. Guys, thank you so much for tuning into this show, as you always do. This is the first Monday show we've done in quite a bit, but it will be a thing that will be happening for the next foreseeable future. I would say it's going to be a while before we don't have a Monday show. Again, follow me on Twitter right there at MVP_Ethan. Follow Gary at GaryMo2007. Follow the podcast at Locked On Pirates on everything. It's everywhere, and it's free and available to you 5 days a week. Have a wonderful rest of your Monday. I'll see you tomorrow with Paul Francis Sullivan of Locked On MLB. But until then, I will see you guys on the flip side.